The cameras lit up, applause echoed through the studio as Stephen Colbert welcomed his next guest with his usual charm. She's an icon, a global superstar, and the face of resilience, ladies and gentlemen, Jennifer Lopez. The crowd cheered as JLo stepped onto the stage, smiling gracefully, dressed in a fitted white suit with silver heels that clicked softly as she walked. She sat across from Colbert with practiced ease. She had done this many times before. Hundreds of interviews, dozens of talk shows. But tonight, something felt off. The lights were too bright. The air was a little too cold. There was something in Colbert's eyes, friendly, yes, but sharp, calculating. They started with the usual small talk. Her new film, Barrio Fuego, had just premiered. It was a gritty political drama centered on a Latina mother fighting corruption in her community. Jennifer spoke passionately about the story, about the power of voices that were often silenced. The audience clapped at the right moments. They laughed when she teased Colbert for mispronouncing abuela. But then his tone shifted. "You've played some powerful women lately," he said, fingers folded, leaning in just enough to signal this was more than just banter. Strong, fierce, political even. A real shift from the rom-coms of the early 2000s. Jennifer's smile thinned just slightly. "I think I've always played strong women," she answered calmly. "Even when they were soft or funny, they had strength. Maybe the world just sees it now." Colbert chuckled. "Fair enough. But some would say you've reinvented yourself. You've recalibrated the JLo brand for this new cultural climate. Would you agree?" The word brand hit like a quiet punch. She didn't flinch, but her eyes sharpened. Her voice softened. "I'm not a brand. I'm a human being who's worked hard for decades, who survived a lot. That's not marketing. That's living." The audience clapped, but there was a strange pause before they did, as if they weren't sure if this was still part of the show. Colbert leaned back. "Of course. But when someone spends their whole adult life in the spotlight, it's hard. For people to separate public and private, don't you think?" Jennifer looked at him with a faint smile, but her body shifted. Her crossed legs became still, her fingers pressed together. "And whose fault is that?" she asked calmly. "The public's curiosity or the media's obsession with feeding it?" A low O floated from the back of the studio. It wasn't loud, but it was real. Colbert smiled politely, but the tension was visible now. His producer coughed off stage. The band shifted awkwardly in their seats. He pressed on. "But you've leaned into it too, haven't you? The documentaries. The album releases wrapped in personal stories. The reality series. You fed the machine too." It was a bold move. One few talk show hosts dared to make on air. Jennifer tilted her head slightly, still smiling, but there was fire in her eyes now. Her voice dropped, quieter but more powerful. "Let me ask you something. Stephen, why is it when a woman tells her story, it's seen as feeding the machine, but when others do it, it's called transparency?" The crowd was silent now. No applause, no laughter, just silence. Stephen blinked. And for the first time in the show, he didn't have a comeback ready. Jennifer leaned forward slightly, her words slow and measured. "This movie is about how corruption works in plain sight. How it hides in smiles and deals in headlines. It's not just in the barrios. Everywhere." She looked right at him. And in that moment, the show stopped feeling like a show. It felt like something else was about to begin. A network error occurred. "Please check your connection and try again. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help.openeye.com. Retry the studio was so quiet. You could hear the faint whir of the overhead lights. Stephen Colbert shifted in his chair, clearly trying to reset the mood. He forced a chuckle and tapped his cue cards with a practiced flick of the wrist. "Well," he said, "you've certainly got the room thinking." Jennifer Lopez didn't move. She kept her gaze locked on him, as if waiting to see which direction he'd go. There was no smirk, no tease, just a deep stillness in her face. Colbert tried again, reaching for charm. Look, I think it's fair to say the world's had a complicated relationship with you. It's the love stories, the breakups, the reunions. It's all part of the public record. Doesn't that kind of visibility come with a price? Jennifer blinked. Slowly, it comes with a tax, she said. And that tax is paid every single D in silence, in sacrifice, in spin. That wasn't the kind of answer he expected. He paused, unsure whether to press further or pivot. The control room whispered into his earpiece, move on to lighter stuff. Shift tone, but he didn't. Something about her presence held him there. It wasn't rage, it wasn't showmanship, it was control. The kind of control that comes only after years of being misunderstood, edited, broken, and forced to smile through it all. So when you say spin, Colbert asked, trying to keep his voice even, are you talking about tabloids, social media, or are you saying your own team spun your image? Jennifer exhaled. Not a sigh, something else. A slow release of tension. I'm saying all of it, she said. You don't get to build a 30-year career in this business without becoming fluent in the language of control. Every photo, every quote, every tweet, it's all part of a machine that pretends to be spontaneous. But it's not. It's managed. And sometimes when you're young and you're scared, you let people speak for you. You let them decide how much of your truth is marketable. A nervous murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't a celebrity being real for applause. This was different. Colbert leaned in. But you're speaking for yourself now. Her eyes didn't leave his. But I should have been doing that the whole time. There was something under her voice and edge, a story untold. The air was heavy with anticipation. The audience sat like statues, waiting. Stephen saw an opportunity maybe to get her to open up. Maybe to reclaim control of the narrative. Okay, but you also chose to be in the public eye. You made documentaries about your relationships. You performed at the Super Bowl in a costume that had half the country arguing about modesty versus expression. Isn't that part of the game? Jennifer smiled tightly. You think this is a game? He didn't answer. She continued. People always say that like I planned all this. Like I sat in a room one day and said, let's turn my heartbreak into ratings. That's not how it works. You know what happens? A producer calls your team and says, we want to tell your love story because it gives people hope. And you're tired, you're hurting. And they say it'll help your album. So you nod. And suddenly your life is a content strategy. Silence again. She looked out at the audience for the first time since the segment began. I played along for years. I smiled, I posed, I cried on cue. But at some point, you realize they're not cheering for you. They're cheering for the version of you they've been sold. Colbert was quiet now. The lines on his face were tighter. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. But the audience was glued. Then, with perfect calm, Jennifer said, you think they only manipulate pop stars? The room froze. Colbert blinked. What do you mean? She didn't smile. I mean, the same machine that edits reality TV and crafts Instagram filters also shapes public opinion, political narratives, and national conversations. This isn't just about me. It never was. The control room buzzed commercial. Cut to black. Colbert ignored them. You're saying there's something bigger? He asked, now more cautious. I'm saying if you think the manipulation stops at red carpets, you haven't been paying attention. There was a long pause. Then slowly Jennifer leaned back in her chair. And if you want to know what that really looks like, she said, we can talk about a story the media buried in 2006. A story with my name on it. Colbert opened his mouth, but no words came. She leaned in just slightly. Let's see. If they let that part air. The camera stayed on her face just a second too long before the director finally cut to commercial. The screen went black, but in the studio, no one moved. And from that moment on, everyone knew This was no longer just an interview. 'Twas a reckoning. The commercial break was supposed to last 90 seconds. It ran for nearly 4 minutes. Inside the studio, no one dared to speak. The producers huddled behind the cameras, whispering furiously. Assistants with headsets rushed in and out of frame, trying not to draw attention. Stephen Colbert sat frozen, his mug untouched, eyes locked on his desk as though it might offer answers. Jennifer Lopez didn't move. She sat perfectly still, hands resting on her lap, chin slightly raised, her silence more commanding than any monologue, a quiet storm in designer heels. When the cameras finally came back on, the air was different. Colbert offered no jokes, no witty segue. He cleared his throat and spoke like a man realizing the rules had changed mid-game. Before the break, he said slowly, "You mentioned something unexpected. A story from 2006. Do you want to elaborate?" Jennifer nodded, but not before glancing offstageware. Her publicist stood stiffly, eyes wide. She knew the risk. But she also knew silence had cost her more than the truth ever could. In 2006, she began. I was approached by a journalist, someone from Madrid, who'd been investigating a financial scandal involving a powerful US-based investment group. It was complicated. Money laundering, offshore accounts, campaign donations being funneled into political machines. I wasn't a target, I was a witness. Colbert leaned forward, trying to catch up. A witness? To what exactly? She hesitated. For just a breath, to a dinner. One dinner. But that dinner connected a sitting senator, a defense contractor, and an international financer, one who, 2 years later, mysteriously vanished off the coast of Portugal. I was there as a guest of the producer I was dating at the time. I didn't know the stakes then. I just thought it was another industry dinner with rich people and foreign investors. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. And what happened after that dinner? Colbert asked, now measured like a prosecutor treading carefully. Jennifer's voice dropped slightly. A week later, I got a call. The journalist wanted a statement. I declined politely. Then a lawyer called. Said I could be helpful if I remembered anything. Again, I declined. The next day, 3 offers I had on the table, 2 films, and 1 ad campaign disappeared. No explanation. Colbert blinked. You think you were blacklisted? I know I was, she said. My agent confirmed it off the record. He told me to stay quiet. Said the people involved had influence way beyond Hollywood. Ah! And this was never reported. She laughed softly. Of course not. The journalist. Dead within 6 months. Supposed car crash outside Valencia. No autopsy released. The only paper trail that still exists is in a safe deposit box in Madrid. I've seen it. The audience didn't clap. They didn't breathe. Stephen's tone changed again, no longer playful. Not even skeptical, but something more dangerous. Intrigued. Jennifer, he said, if this is true, why come forward now? Why here? She looked him in the eye. 'Cause for years I thought being successful meant being silent. That I owed my survival to discretion. But watching the world now, how easily truth gets buried under clicks. How women get mocked for being too dramatic or too emotional, I realized silence is complicity. Colbert sat back in his chair. You're saying the entertainment world and the political world aren't separate? She nodded. They never were. And the people who control the narrative know that. That's why I was never supposed to say anything. That's why tonight matters. A small rustle came from the control booth. One of the producers had stood up and was waving at Colbert behind the glass. Cut it off. Cut it now. He ignored them. What about the others who were at that dinner? He asked. The senator, the finance, can you name them? Jennifer exhaled slowly. Not yet, but I will. If this airs. There it was, a direct challenge to the system, live on national television. Colbert glanced toward the control room. He knew. They'd be scrambling, already fact-checkers calling Washington, corporate lawyers on standby, PR teams crafting statements. And yet something in him shifted. For a brief moment, he wasn't a late-night host. He was a journalist again. The son of a newsroom culture that believed in accountability before algorithms replaced ethics. He turned back to Jennifer and said, "This isn't just an interview anymore, is it?" She shook her head. "No, it's a warning." As the segment drew to a close, the audience still didn't move. They weren't sure if they had witnessed a confession, an expose, or a reckoning. Backstage, Jennifer's team was already being approached by network executives demanding answers. In the parking lot, a black SUV sat idling, engine running, windows dark. And miles away, in a private residence on Capitol Hill, a retired senator received a phone call he had hoped would never come. "Sir," said the voice on the line, "she's talking." And everything changed. Jennifer Lopez walked off the Colbert stage with her face calm, but her hands trembling. The moment she stepped into the corridor behind the cameras, her publicist, Marla, grabbed her elbow. "You went off script," Marla hissed. "Do you know what you just did?" Jennifer didn't answer. She could hear the studio behind her still echoing with the hush of disbelief. Audience members hadn't clapped, they hadn't stood, they just watched. That kind of silence wasn't just awkward, it was historic. "I told the truth," she said simply, brushing past Marla. Her phone buzzed. Then again, then nonstop. She slipped into her dressing room, shut the door, and looked at the screen. 46 missed messages. 3 from her agent. 5 from producers. 1 from someone whose name she hadn't seen in years, Carmen Solis. The name hit her like ice water. Carmen had been the Madrid journalist who approached her in 2006, the one who died in a supposed car crash. But Jennifer knew that. Wasn't true, not entirely. Carmen's death certificate had been sealed, the autopsy never published. Her family hadn't even been allowed to retrieve her personal effects. Jennifer had suspected from the beginning that Carmen hadn't died. Accidentally, but she had no way to prove it. Now, after all these years of silence, the name appeared again through a private messaging app she hadn't used in over a decade. The message was short. "Meet me. 12th ND, 10 p.m. Come alone." Jennifer stared at it for a long time. Heart pounded in her ears. If this was real, if Carmen was alive, it meant everything she suspected about that night in 2006 had been true. It also meant someone had gone to great lengths to bury the story. And if Carmen had resurfaced now, it was no coincidence. There were no coincidences in politics or media, only consequences. Crosstown, inside a glass office high above Manhattan, Stephen Colbert sat in a leather chair as 4 CBS executives stared him down. The head of programming tapped his pen. "Stephen," he said tightly, "we need to know if this was prearranged." "It wasn't," Colbert said. "She went off script." "Did you know what she was going to say?" "No." The head of legal leaned forward. "You realize the implications?" She just publicly implicated a former U.S. senator in an international corruption cover-up. That dinner she mentioned, Dower Research confirms it took place. If we air the segment unedited, we're liable. Stephen didn't flinch. And if we don't air it, there was a long pause. The 4th person at the tabla, woman from the network's crisis. The management team answered coldly. Then we bury it like everything else. That night, a partial segment aired. The interview cut off before Jennifer mentioned the dinner, before she challenged the system, before she warned the public. But someone had already leaked the raw footage. It was online within hours. The next morning, hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag JLO exposes the dinner. Hashtag Colbert cuts truth. Hashtag Carmen is alive. And while the press tried to parse fact from performance, Jennifer stood at a dimly lit street corner in D.C., wearing a scarf and sunglasses, her hands buried deep in the pockets of a long coat. It was nearly 10 p.m. She was alone. A black sedan rolled up slowly. The passenger side windows slid down. "Get in?" said a voice she hadn't heard in 19 years. It was Carmen. Jennifer slipped into the car. "You're alive," she whispered. "I had to disappear," Carmen said, driving slowly down the nearly empty street. After the dinner, I got too close. There were Swiss banks, encrypted wires, contracts between U.S. defense firms, and a South American consortium that technically didn't exist. When I asked questions, I got answers. And threats. Jennifer listened, stunned. "They tried to kill me in Spain," Carmen continued. "So I staged the crash, took a friend's ID, buried the wreck. I've lived under 4 aliases since, but I saw your interview. I knew it was time. You still have the documents." Jennifer asked. "All of them," Carmen said. "And I'm not the only one." Jennifer sat back. "What do we do?" Now, Carmen didn't hesitate. "We go public, but not through the networks. We leak it ourselves. There's a platform in Iceland and censored offshore. Once the data is out, no one can stop it. But you need to be ready. They'll come for you. This isn't a scandal. This is a war." Back in Manhattan, Stephen Colbert sat alone in his office, watching the full tape of the interview on a private monitor. His hand hovered over the phone. He was about to call a journalist friend at the Atlantic, someone he trusted, to take this further. But then the line went dead. The lights in his office flickered. The building's security system rebooted itself. And in the corner of his screen, a message appeared. "Stop, we're watching." For the first time in years, Stephen felt real fear. It was just after midnight when Jennifer and Carmen reached a safe house in Northern Virginia. A single lamp lit the kitchen. Thick blackout curtains covered the windows. The air inside smelled of coffee, dust, and old secrets. Carmen opened her laptop and slid it toward Jennifer. "This is what I kept hidden," she said, "and it's only the beginning." Jennifer stared at the screen. Dozens of folders, each one named after obscure defense companies, offshore banks, and political operations she didn't recognize at first, but some names stood out. One folder read Delacroix 107, another Operation Jasmine Q2, and then Lopez WME correspondence. Her blood ran cold. "You were being watched," Carmen said. "Since 2003. Emails, phone calls, even intercepted scripts. They didn't just track you. They profiled you. You were considered pliable until you weren't." Jennifer clicked through a series of redacted memos. In one, dated March 2012, an internal State Department advisor described her charity's Puerto Rican Water Initiative as culturally disruptive to existing aid channels. Another, from 2016, accused her of strategic interference with approved election messaging when she posted an Instagram video urging Latinx turnout. "They called me disruptive for encouraging people to vote?" Jennifer asked, stunned. Carmen nodded. "Because your influence wasn't under their control, they let you be powerful, just not too powerful." Jennifer sat back. The magnitude of it all crushed against her chest like a weight. Her fame had made her visible, but also vulnerable. She thought she was protected by celebrity. Instead, she'd been a puppet in a far more sinister performance. "There's more," Carmen said, pulling up a new document. "The dinner. The one you mentioned on Colbert's show. It happened, and the guest list was quietly classified last year. But I retrieved fragments of it from a DC cyber leak in 2018. She opened a photo. A grainy image of a long mahogany table. Around it sat 6 people. Jennifer recognized 3 of them immediately: a former senator, a media executive, and a now disgraced energy mogul. At the far end of the table, barely in the frame Stephen Colbert, Jennifer blinked. "No, that can't be right," she muttered. Carmen enlarged the image. He was there, not as a guest, as an observer. Maybe even a messenger. Felt her throat tighten. He acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. Carmen looked at her sharply. Maybe he didn't remember. Or maybe he remembered too well. Back in New York, Stephen Colbert sat in his apartment staring at an old photo album. Side it tucked between pages of vacations, snapshots, and Emmy. After parties was a single invitation. Confidential Roundtable Shadow Calvert 2006. No phones. No cameras, no press. His fingers shook as he traced the date. He hadn't thought about that night in years, had forgotten or convinced himself he had. There had been talk of foreign influence operations, image crafting, celebrity ambassadors, and how to utilize Hollywood not just to entertain, but to shape. It had all seemed like theory. Abstract, he had been invited as a rising political satirist. Nothing more, he'd told himself. But now Jennifer had cracked something open on live television. And someone was listening. Stephen picked up his phone and called his producer. Canceled tomorrow's show, he said. No guests, no monologue, just archive footage. You okay? The voice asked no, he whispered. And neither is she. Across the Atlantic in a secure server bunker outside Reykjavik. 2 journalists from an independent European outlet received a data drop, unmarked, time-stamped. Inside a torrent of documents. Images, contracts, and metadata spanning 2 decades. One file caught the editor's eye. Project Spectacle. Use of hyperfile Latinas in geopolitical PR strategy. He clicked it open. What he found sent chills through him. It outlined covert operations involving state-sponsored image campaigns. The recruitment of minority celebrities to support U.S. trade initiatives and carefully structured romantic scandals, designed to distract media from impending sanctions or oil deals. Jennifer Lopez's name appeared 17 times. The journalist's hands flew across the keyboard. They needed to publish, but safely. Every journalist who'd tried to publish pieces of this puzzle before had ended up discredited, exiled, or dead. They activated their dead man switch. If anything happened to them, the entire archive would be dumped into the public domain. At 3:04 a.m., Jennifer stood at the edge of the rooftop in the safe house, staring out into the darkness. They'll come for us now, she said. Carmen joined her. They already are. A quiet beep came from Carmen's phone. She looked down. It started. Iceland's publishing it all. Jennifer didn't smile. This isn't the climax, she said. This is just the fuse. From that rooftop, they watched the lights of Washington, D.C. blink across the horizon like a sleeping beast just starting to stir. And far below, in the silence, black sedans began circling again. The hunt had begun. By sunrise, the world had changed. The Icelandic leak hit the global news cycle like a lightning bolt. Major outlets were cautious, using phrases like alleged, unverified, and under review. But social media wasn't waiting. Screenshots of classified contracts, voice clips from U.S. Embassy conversations. Even a leaked transcript from a defense intelligence meeting about celebrity manipulation, which was all out there now. Jennifer Lopez was no longer just a celebrity, caught in a media moment. She was the central figure in what news outlets were calling Spectaclegate. At CNN, anchors treaded carefully. We've seen Jennifer Lopez as an artist, a performer, a businesswoman, one host said. But today, she's become something else, a reluctant symbol in a battle over government secrecy and manipulation. In London, Parliament called an emergency hearing over the documents tying UK intelligence to Hollywood consultants. In Berlin, protesters marched with signs that read "Latina power is not propaganda." And in Washington, panic set in. In a glass-walled conference room at the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, 3 intelligence directors and 2 senior White House advisors sat around a long table. The president wasn't present, but his shadow hung in the silence. Containment is no longer an option, said one of the CIA officials. This is hemorrhaging into every media outlet outside Five Eyes jurisdiction. Iceland won't pull. The archive. We have 6 journalists openly calling this a Western psychological warfare expose. A Homeland Security official spoke next. Then we control the narrative. If we discredit Lopez, We don't need to touch her. We just need to make her look unstable. But she's not alone, someone else said. She's working with someone. Our intercepts caught movement through Langley's restricted server channels. She's got help inside help. The room fell quiet. Meanwhile, Jennifer and Carmen moved again, this time to a secure location in Baltimore, hidden beneath an app. Old theater repurposed as a community arts center. There, Jennifer sat in front of a camera for the first time since the Colbert interview. This time, there was no glam squad, no lights, no applause. Just her, a microphone, and the raw truth. "I didn't ask to become this," she began, her voice steady. "I didn't ask to be used, but I refuse to be erased." She laid it out. How she was recruited early in her career to represent government-friendly initiatives. How she was advised to build a safe, inspirational narrative for Latin audiences. How behind closed doors, those same advisors discussed her love life, her appearance, and her market value in terms usually reserved for trade commodities. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. "People told me I was too emotional, too ambitious, too proud. Now I see why. Emotion can't be controlled, pride can't be packaged, and ambition. That scares them." The video was uploaded anonymously, mirrored across dozens of servers, and spread within hours. Over 200 million views. Translated into 8 languages. Back in Manhattan, Stephen Colbert sat in his office alone, watching it unfold. He didn't go on air that night. Instead, he made a call to the one person he hadn't spoken to in 14 years, Lila Cross, a former political strategist turned whistleblower who had vanished from public life after testifying in a private intelligence abuse case. "I need to talk," Stephen said. "I think I helped build the stage for something I didn't understand." Lila didn't laugh. "You think?" She agreed to meet him in Montreal. Meanwhile, Carmen was tracking a different lead, one buried deep in the Icelandic dump, a contract marked Project Cayuga. It linked a global PR firm to a secretive committee within NATO's communications wing. The clause that stood out: target perception testing to be conducted via multi-platform celebrity influence trials. Focus: minority female engagement in trade-friendly sentiment across Southern Europe and Latin America. Under personnel and access, 3 names were listed. One of them, Dr. Marcus Delacroix. Carmen's eyes widened. Delacroix wasn't just a name. He was the architect of psychological narrative warfare in the 2000s. A myth until now. Turn to Jennifer, he's real. And if he's involved, we're dealing with more than just manipulation. We're looking at an entire doctrine of controlled storytelling across borders. Jennifer nodded slowly. "Then we exposed the doctrine." But that meant going further, beyond leaks, beyond confessions. They needed to draw out the architects. And there was only one way to do that. "You're not thinking," Carmen began. "I'll go back on air," Jennifer said. "Live, no pre-recorded message, no edits, just a direct challenge." The city was pulsing with tension. New York's skyline glittered like a battlefield dressed for diplomacy. Every rooftop in Manhattan seemed to carry a lens, a dish, or a scanner. Surveillance was no longer hidden, it had become the background hum of civilization. But tonight, every eye was on one building, the Roosevelt Media Center. It was neutral ground, independent, and, most importantly, live. At precisely 8 p.m., Jennifer Lopez walked onto the stage of the makeshift studio. There was no cheering. Audience, no band. Just for cameras, a broadcasting team sworn to anonymity, and millions waiting around the world. She wore black. No jewelry, no makeup. The only adornment, a small silver mic pinned to her collar. Carmen stood just off stage, headset on, her fingers flicking between data windows, watching every cyber breach attempt. The producer gave a silent countdown. 3, 2, 1. The feed went live. "This is not a movie," Jennifer began. "There is no script, no studio, and no take two. This is the truth. Her voice was clear, controlled. Behind her, a screen lit up showing scanned documents, classified memos, project charts, names, code names, and most chillingly Project Cayuga's directive: perception control through emotional trust. Agents. She paused. You've trusted me with your attention for decades. You've followed my music, my films, my failures, my marriages. But what if I told you that trust was tracked, measured, and worse, weaponized? She explained. The pipeline. How real intelligence operatives created emotionally aligned personas through celebrities. How voices like hers were used to promote trade deals, political doctrines, and military alliances subtly, surgically, and across cultures. I was one of them, she said. But I didn't know the full extent until now. The feed flickered. Carmen leaned forward. It's trying to breach the satellite uplink, she whispered. Hold it together, the producer growled. It's just 3 more minutes, Jennifer continued, revealing how her recent film Las Sombras del Rio was quietly funded through shell corporations tied to intelligence fronts. The story of resilience, chosen to shift sentiment ahead of trade negotiations in Central America. The betrayal wasn't just political, it was personal. They didn't just borrow my voice, she said. They programmed it. I was a tool, a softened weapon. And then came the moment that stopped hearts across continents. I am not afraid, she said, not of being silenced, not of being targeted, 'cause I am not alone anymore. Behind her, the screen split, showing live feeds of thousands protesting in Paris, Santiago, Jakarta, and Johannesburg. From her message, from the leak, from the truth. Just then, Carmen's eyes widened. A red alert blinked on her screen. Oh, they've deployed Sentinel, she said. We have less than 60 seconds before this feed is taken out worldwide. Jennifer nodded calmly. Then, let's finish what we started. She looked straight into the camera, her voice soft but unshakable. To those watching who still hide behind doctrine and denial, Dr. Marcus Delacroix, this message is for you. She lifted a folder from the table. Inside were internal memos with his signature. Pages detailing operations stretching back to the early 2000s. Celebrity PS ops. Media manipulation. Even references to targeting trauma survivors for high empathy impact. This isn't fiction, she said. It's your system, your design. I'm no longer a face on your poster. I'm your reckoning. The screen glitched again. Carmen yelled. Now, Jennifer, end it. Jennifer leaned forward, eyes blazing. We see you now. And you no longer control the narrative. We do. Then she pressed a single button. It triggered a simultaneous upload of the full Spectacular archive to 7 decentralized platforms, irreversible, untraceable. The feed cut blackout across the world. The shock was immediate. Networks scrambled to verify the broadcast. Some called it revolutionary media. Others dismissed it as celebrity hysteria. But the documents were real. The protests doubled, then tripled. Within hours, whistleblowers from multiple nations came forward. Governments convened emergency meetings. NATO issued a vague statement about strategic psychological tools in outdated contexts. The White House refused comment. But something had cracked in. It couldn't be sealed again. At a quiet lakeside cabin in Quebec, Stephen Colbert sat beside Lila Cross, both watching the ripple effects unfold on a small laptop. She did it, Stephen whispered. Lila nodded. She burned the curtain. Now everyone sees the stage. Stephen looked out at the water, haunted. And us? What do we do? She didn't smile. She didn't blink. We tell the rest. Back in New York, Jennifer and Carmen emerged from hiding. They weren't fugitives. They weren't icons. They were something stranger, symbols in a war of meaning. At the center of a shattered illusion, they stood still, hands unclenched, watching the new world begin. And in that silence, a generation found its voice.